Right.
Hey, everybody. This is Greene, Fyre, and Will Markham. We're going live in just a minute with Bob Bose, who's going to talk about global transformation. Very exciting topic. His book that he's been writing about how we're going to get there through people action. I wanted to introduce Will because Will has been producing our wonderful second monthly live streaming marathon of truth and citizen journalism. And Will's going to pop out, and he's going to be sharing useful information. And he's arranged an amazing group of folks who are part of our collective, the Greene Fyre Collective, who are helping to share and promote and get the word out. So Will's popping off to help us do that, and Bob and I are going to get started. So thanks, Will.
Yeah.
All right, let me get yourself set. So, hey, Bob. This is so
Greene.
exciting. This is the first time that we're going to actually do a live stream that we might actually have tech that works. Yay!
I know. I'm excited too. That's always good. Will and I had a good test run
Great.
the other day.
So people need to know that Bob is sitting in his little pyramid-shaped office on top of his mountain looking at the Continental Divide in Colorado. He's just soaking in the big vision that he's going to share with us. So Bob, you and I have had so many hours of conversation, I almost don't even know how to start a formal interview. So I'm going to step back and I'm going to get you started. Just do it.
Okay. Well, you assigned me the topic that is exactly the same name as my book.
What a coincidence. How did that happen?
I know you're psychic, which I appreciate. It makes things a lot easier.
I didn't even ask you. How presumptuous.
It's fine, of course, because I can tie anything to the theme of the book or vice versa, right, as it were.
Because you have that forceful Aries nature with that pliant and flexible Pisces moon, or whatever it is, Pisces rising.
Yes, Pisces? Cancer moon, actually.
Cancer, oh my God. Water abounding. So
yes.
Go.
Okay, so 7 steps to global economic and spiritual transformation. This is the title of my, new book coming up. It's at the printers as we speak.
Yay.
So that'll get me a proof copy, and I'll look at that and then give it the go-ahead. And it'll take a while for it to be on sale, but it won't be long now. So what I thought we could do is just talk about each of these 7 steps. If we've got an hour and we did 8 minutes. Yeah, if we did an hour and we did 8 minutes, that would about get us there. But I'm hoping to do it a little quicker for each step so that we can actually, at the end, see how to apply this.
Oh, yes.
To any subject, whatever's going on, the memo or what have you, North Korea.
Right.
Okay. So, let me just go over the 7 steps and then we'll take them one by one. How's that?
Okay. Yes.
Okay, so step 1 is exposing the story of money and usury. I put that first because my thesis really is the root cause of global dysfunction is private control over money creation. And so that's why we start with that. The second one is a little more difficult for most people to really get what I'm talking about here. I call step 2 rejecting the false divisions of ethnicities, religions, political parties, and nationalities. So basically what we have is a lot of people going around conflating different nouns depending on the subject that you're going in. And I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to say, each of these things are separate. If we're going to be logical here at all, let's define our terms. The third step is transposing the money.
Socrates was killed for being logical. Just FYI.
Oh, yeah, I know. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle are responsible really for defining logical fallacies. They set the stage for this. And that's okay. I won't drink the hemlock. I'm going to, if they come after me, they're going to have to, it's going to be obvious. So I'll let them.
Okay, but we'll power forward with logic here.
Okay, that's good. Logic's a good place to start.
It definitely is.
Yeah. Okay. So the third step is transposing the money cartel's point of view. And my point is to simply show people how the world is seen from the top of the power pyramid. Most people, because of their, limited resources or whatever, they have a difficult time imagining what it would be like if you had all the levers of power of those who control the central banks and such, and how things work. And so that's what that step is about. My fourth step is making money a public utility through sustainable economics. So I actually try to create a model for people to show them how the world would work if money was a public utility and it was publicly owned. Right. And this opens up all sorts of things for us because all of our dreams are possible, and we could easily achieve them if the case was that money was a public utility. The fifth step is restoring democracy. Most people don't know the history of the United States, how our democratic republic was stolen by banking interests, essentially, and their corporations. The sixth step is restoring law, science, and logic. So that's what we were talking about. Right. This is really, Orwell's such a great example here, because he really explained to us, 70 years ago, how our ability to think, and therefore our ability to be free, is being destroyed. So this is a way to attempt to get that back. And then the seventh step is a little bit different. So we go through 6 steps that we have to understand in order to see what's really been done to us and how to fix things, not to repeat the same mistakes. But the 7th step is a personal step for every one of us. Okay. This is something, we have to walk that lonesome valley by ourselves. That old spiritual song.
Well, it's sort of become a Western anthem for us people who moved out here to the top of mountains to think about how to fix the world. Yes. Right.
So it's like, what are we doing personally? A part of my thesis is that what we're facing here as humanity at its crossroads is the next step in human evolution. And that step is overcoming the tyranny of the instincts and the ego, and basically sharing, being selfless, sharing. And we have to do this in order to evolve. And a lot of people will say, well, that's utopian. And the way the universe works is
practical. It's practical. When you realize the iniquity and the deep dysfunction of the system, it throws you upon yourself, and you must reflect on it. And you either enter a place of nihilism, or you enter a place of where your ego breaks. It literally feels like it breaks, and the flood of the collective comes in. So I find it to be a practical step. So,
yes, and not only is it practical, it's absolutely necessary if we're going to survive in a progressive spiritual manner. Right.
Okay, so let's go through all 7. I'm really excited. Let's go. Okay. Let's go through them all.
So exploring.
Hang on, just one second. Can you let the cat, honey? We have all kinds of things happening here. So yes, go ahead.
Okay. So step 1, exposing the story of money and usury. This is simply a matter of understanding what money is, how it's different than capital.
Yes.
How usury or interest turns money into capital, and therefore commodifies not only money, but labor. So this is how people become commodities in a capitalist system, right? It's very simple. Money starts out as the value created by labor. So you put in a certain amount of hours doing something, you should get credit for this, and you can trade those hours or the value of those hours for some goods or services that others create in the same way by putting in a certain number of hours. You can call these things... So in its
purest form, like that would be like a barter system that would be set up, or a let's system. People have heard of those, Berkshire bucks, the local. So that's in the purest form. There are systems that are set up where you get a value attached to an hour of a person's labor, and then that is actually what's shared in some of these forms of local currency or share currencies. Go on.
Exactly. It's actually a step up from barter because it does create a lowest common denominator.
Right, which is an hour of a person's labor.
Yeah, of exchange. And if you study the works of Benjamin Franklin, and he wrote essays on this and other founders, he understands this perfectly. Franklin talked about it. Lincoln talked about it. Aristotle himself talked about this function of value. The problem comes in is when somebody takes those units and lends their collection of them to somebody else and charges interest,
right?
Because interest is simply the commodity, the monetization of time, and so it doesn't really represent any labor. It's as if the universe's time was somehow increasing the value of this money that you've just turned into capital, and so
the first problem arises when an hour of my time gets now exchanged for an hour and a half of your time. So all of a sudden, you have to be giving more of your lifeblood to whatever this exchange was that we did. And that ends up with some people being in servitude and not actually having quality of life, which is, of course, the way that this has been, this unfair economic system has been exported all over the world. That's exactly what we see in the third world.
Yes, that's exactly it. Because basically then I'm devaluing your time.
That's right.
You have to work extra hours to pay me back.
Oh, no, you're doing that for me. I just wanted to make that clear. But anyway, go on.
Okay, whichever one of us is being the banker.
Exactly. And it's like instantly in our minds, we're like, oh, fuck no, I'm going to be the one who gets more for my hour. It's like it really stimulates and gets our shadow going in a really negative way. So going on.
This always reminds me of my favorite political cartoon. It was done by Tom Tolish, who's a political cartoonist for the Washington Post. He did a political cartoon called The Short Game of Monopoly. And it's explained like this. One person is appointed banker. Yeah. He wins. That's the short game of Monopoly.
Exactly.
So if you're going to play Monopoly, make sure you get appointed banker because you'll end up with the most money if you do it right.
Right.
Okay. So this is the exposing the story of money and usury, and I think at a certain level we've just covered this. Basically, what happens when you devalue labor like this? People work their whole lives creating value, and in the end have nothing to show for it because it's all been stolen from them by the usurers, and that's what's happening in the world now.
To the company store. Yeah.
That's it. You got it. Woody Guthrie. Thank you.
Woody Guthrie. That's right.
Yeah. Well, cue Woody Guthrie. Okay. So now the second issue that we get to, the second step in really transforming the world is, and this is before we take personal action, just so we don't get caught up in false, wasting our time doing things, is what I call rejecting the false divisions of ethnicity, religions, political parties, and nationalities. The simple thing here is the red and blue charade. Okay. So we've got the what used to be called the Democratic Party and what used to be called the Republican Party. I don't use those terms, actually. I just say red and blue marketing masks or brands of those who control it, which is basically the Anglo-Euro-American banking cartel and its corporations. It's pretty simple to see this. Most of our audience already knows this. Look at any legislation that goes through the Congress. It's all for the corporations and the banks. None of it's for the people. They may mislead you temporarily.
That's right.
So in order for the Blue Party to keep
hang on just a second, Bob. I think it's important for people who haven't seen this to go Google the 147
Okay.
entities that own everything.
Right.
You and I have ascertained that there's a couple dozen, mostly central banks, that own the 147 banks and holding companies that own every single corporation. And if you look at the map that was put out by WikiLeaks this week, showing how then their next level of entity, like the Trilateral Commission, Bilderberg, whatever, own all of the media and the corporations, you begin to see that there's this big web that before the internet and before smart people who could do things like systems analysis, people didn't see how it was all tied back to this small group. Now it's much easier to see. So people should go look up the Forbes article, 147 companies that control the world or own everything. I think it's called.
That's good. This is all based on a study done by 3 complex systems analysts from the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in 2010.
Right.
The first place that this appeared, other than these archives at Cornell University, which is where the research is posted, is in New Scientist magazine. So if you want to actually see the study, you can first go to the original article posted by New Scientist magazine. There's Will's posting one link right now, but you can just basically Google New Scientist. Will you
find that one too?
Okay, so New Scientist and capitalist system that runs the world. Was the title of the article, and in the first paragraph, there's a direct link to the actual study.
Research. Great.
Yeah. Okay. So the other research that I tie to this always, and I recommend for people to put 2 and 2 together, is in 1976, the United States House of Representatives Committee on Banking commissioned a study to see whether the original half-dozen families that started the Federal Reserve System still controlled it. And they found out that this was true. And there's this is on Scribd. This document is on Scribd. Right. Scribed, okay. And there's a companion document where somebody took this data and then basically parsed it to show you the actual structure of the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds, and a few others who control this, the Federal Reserve System.
And Ron Paul, even way back when, he was behind very courageously insisting that study get done.
Who was?
I believe Ron Paul was one of the people who, way back when.
Well, it's possible. 1976. Yeah. There were still a few people in the Congress who understood this.
I have to say that if you want to learn about blockchain, which is being touted as this alternative to the banking cartel, it's going to take it down. Bunch of horse shit. If you Google TED Talks. It's just to show that these families are still in control. If you Google TED Talks blockchain, you'll find Bettina Warburg is the latest banking cartel family shill who's been designated to chill it. If you look up the name Bettina Warburg, you see that it must be a great aunt or a namesake of some kind, sister to Paul Warburg. She was so anyway, they still have their claws in everything.
Yes, the Warburgs were the family that represented the Rothschilds
That's
when the Federal Reserve System was formed.
Right.
Aldrich represented the Rockefellers.
Yeah,
that's still a family name within the Rockefellers. Nelson, Aldrich, Rockefeller, etc.
Right.
Okay.
So just to show that they still hold the reins. I mean, how would they not? Who has mounted any challenge to them of any kind?
Right. Well, back to your point about owning all the corporations and stuff. There are still a few outstanding entities that they're attacking. Every nation destroyed since 9/11 controlled its own central bank and currency. There's only 5 left right now. The official enemies list: Iran, Syria, North Korea, Cuba, and Sudan. So you can see, and then there's a few mavericks that are apparently attempting to, despite the fact that their central banks are private. So if you look at Russia,
Russia,
like okay.
Venezuela, there's been a few who have been Syria, who haven't fully capitulated.
Right, right, and so there's a lot
China
going.
hasn't fully capitulated.
Right, it's interesting. They're all walking a tightrope right now because the cartel, their main asset is controlling the U.S. I use the term U.S. because legally the U.S. as opposed to the USA is actually a specific legal entity that the cartel controls. And this is why the District of Columbia will never be a state as long as they're in control, because it gives them certain rights as a federal district to control their two chief assets. And these, excuse me for just a sec here.
Go ahead.
And these two chief assets are the Federal Reserve System and the Pentagon, both located in the District of Columbia. And so it's through this means that they're attempting to basically take over every country on the planet. And that's what they're doing.
Which is why you and I, when we talk about geopolitics, we don't refer to them as sovereign countries, we refer to them as proxy states for the banking cartel, or the proxy, or as Israel as, Israel's proxy army for the banking cartel.
Yes, it really is. And this has implications as to how people see Israel, because obviously this is a big discussion point. Proxies I use interchangeably with public sector subsidiaries of the cartel. And so a perfect example of this would be whenever the quote U.S. gives jets and armaments to Saudi Arabia and Israel, or they give money, or they give money to Israel or whatever. The Saudis don't need it because they've got all the oil. They see this, the cartel sees this as basically interdepartmental transfers.
That's right.
From one of their subdivisions. They happen to be public sector subdivisions, what we think of as sovereign nations, which they aren't. They're basically just countries, or as Orwell would call them, airstrips.
They're just assets and financial transfers between separate P&Ls within the same corporation.
Right. So, so all of these wars that are going on, the wars against Gaza, the wars against Yemen, the wars in Syria, all the wars that were fought in Afghanistan, Iraq.
And all the secret wars that are going on in Africa right now, and in the Mideast through the Operation Gladio NATO, which the U.S. CIA banking cartel runs. Go on.
Yes, our attempts to undermine Venezuela, everything, Cuba, all of this. This is all being run from a centralized place. And so I urge people not to get lost in going, we should boycott this country or that country. If you're going to boycott them, boycott all of them. Because they're all doing the same thing. This slaughter, as an American citizen, the quote, government called the U.S. is no more represents me than if I was an Israeli or Saudi citizen, and those governments represent those people. Yes, or an Apache. Well, that's a whole longer other story.
But this is a place where you and I disagree, because I see things in terms of their marketing value and their didactic value, and I think that observing the cartel's unified international approach and its insidious control over governments, in particular individual governments, in response to things like the BDS is very illustrative for demonstrating how the cartel works. But another topic, we should have a whole conversation about that at some point.
And that would be a good thing to discuss. My only point with that is, if you're going to do it, explain how they're doing this with a number of countries. It's not just one country or another.
And ask people to engage in BDS as an experiment, to observe how the cartel outs itself. But going on, we have to get through your steps.
Okay.
Steps. We might not get through all of them, but let's see if we can.
Okay. So that's really what step 2 is about: rejecting the false, divisions of ethnicities, religions, political parties. I use a great quote, 1892 U.S. Bankers Magazine, in which they say that one of their modi operandi is simply to divide the people.
Yeah.
in this way. And that's all about, and that why should we be dispersing our energy in all these different directions when, in fact, if we just changed the control over the central banks from a small group of people to the people, we could change any of this. Okay.
Right.
So that brings us to the third step, transposing the money cartel's point of view. So, apropos to your discussion of the power pyramid, looking at those charts, seeing all the levers that they control, it's important to understand
academia, foundations, research, think tanks, they literally create the schools of economics and control what happens there. They literally control what happens in the arts by controlling all of the funding. They literally own the media. They literally own the CDC, which is a private corporation. They literally own the pharmaceutical companies. They own the prison industrial complex. So, yeah, and this is also a classic textbook fascism. But in fascism, people are looking for the Il Duce out there at the head. They're not thinking about a bunch of bankers sitting at the Bank of International Settlements 4 times.
Well, this is exactly as you said. This is the American brand.
Of fascism.
One of the textbook's definitions of fascism is corporate control over the state. That's what we have here. That's fairly obvious. It's not the German or the Italian or the Spanish or all these puppet dictatorships in Latin America that we controlled. And it's nothing to do with that. This is how it's coming down in America. So that is the power pyramid, and that's how they operate it. And people often don't see this. For example, we've had some discussions over currencies. The petro-yuan is a good example. A lot of people out there keep going, well, the petro-yuan, this is the beginning of the end for the petrodollar. And I've written, Those are
the people who haven't read the memo that was put out by The Economist or somebody. It was one of these big economic groups, the World Economic Forum or something, that put out that said, oh, well, Brazil and, India and China and Russia should get together and, create their own trading block. So people don't realize that the cartel dictated the creation of BRICS to create an illusion of competition. But
absolutely. If you look at it, and I have articles, let's say, for example, India, the control that the cartel has over Indian currency and such, So it's a difficult road to hoe. The Russians and the Chinese did create a SWIFT system. Those are all capital letters, so that they can exchange value in their own currencies. And so they do have something.
It doesn't have to go through dollars or pounds or the euro or anything else.
Exactly. And Venezuela has become part of that. They're now working in petro-yuans, all of that. So we'll see how this plays out. The fourth step is, this is the proof in my book. I do it in about 5 or 6 pages in my book, and it basically shows that public banking network with no usury is the only way systematically to create a sustainable economy, and one in which the currency is stable, ad infinitum. This is the only way to do it. And I show that even if you have a public central bank with private commercial and investment banks, or the other way around, where it's a private central bank and public bank, that eventually the private banks will take over. So this is really an important point. I lay it all out. The big value here is that basically it's easy to show that we could have universal income, universal health care, universal education, etc., with a system like this, with plenty of money to do this left over, because we would be eliminating all the costs of interest and all the privateering that goes on in war, healthcare, education, etc.
Okay, so let me back this out a tiny little bit, because most of the people, anyone who's gotten this far, is heavily battling at this point, in most cases, with the voice in their head saying, you don't need to understand economics, leave that to the smart people, we have it handled, you can trust us, you can trust the Fed. So let's take it down to a simple step. And the simple step is creating public banks, local public banks. And there's an explosion of this. Suddenly people are realizing, here we are on year 4 post the Bernie phenomenon of 2015, we started year 4, people are going, fuck, nothing is going to change. That didn't work. What can we do? People are starting to do public banks. And what we have to put out here as a very encouraging point is that as soon as you have a public bank, as quickly as the first year or so after you have a public bank, you can begin to see the benefit in your local community or state and the revenues that aren't being sucked out of the state or city in it, all of its short-term lending and borrowing to itself and to its partners. That money is staying in the community, and it even actually helps because the value, potentially the credibility of all of the other instruments, debt instruments of that entity, are now more valuable because you have a more stable entity, and so people should focus on getting those public banks going. You don't have to memorize Bob's book. You don't have to understand the legal entity of the Corporation of the United States and how that relates to the legal entity of the City of London and the BI Bank of International Settlements in Basel. You don't have to understand any of the complexities of this. Go out and start a public bank and tell us how this is separate and different from a credit union.
Yes, well, you're talking to the right person. I'm one of 5 founders of the Public Banking Institute, of course. That was in 2010.
But I still think it's cooler that you knew Ram Dass and Terrence McKenna personally, and Dennis's brother. But another conversation for another day.
Yeah, we're going to go back to the late 60s someday and talk about all of that stuff.
Well, you were like the wild interviewer of minds in Boulder. Mm-hmm. So back in Boulder's heyday. But going on, weird sideline.
Okay, so public banks. We have one public bank in the United States. It's called the Bank of North Dakota. It's a state bank, so they operate within the Federal Reserve System, and they have to use Federal Reserve notes in order to do this. So they can't do certain things that a public central bank can do. For example, creating national currency, which is a huge advantage. And there are a few countries, like I said, left that can do that. There used to be way more. Australia, Canada, even the United States, all of the 13 original colonies printed their own money. The Continental Congress printed its own money. Abraham Lincoln printed greenbacks, and JFK printed silver certificates. The
Public Banking Institute, but Will's going to find the link to the Public Banking Institute.
Okay, so that's a good. And Colorado Public Banking, that's my blog,
right?
Et cetera.
Great,
but so public banks. The first point here is simply, if you look at the Bank of North Dakota, all of the tax revenues, all of the fees that the state collects go into the Bank of North Dakota. That's simply North Dakota doing business as DBA, the Bank of North Dakota. The Bank of North, when the 2008 crash occurred, North Dakota was the only state that was completely unaffected by this crash.
That's right.
It had the lowest unemployment rate in the United States. It had 0 bank failures. And in fact, the budget of the state of North Dakota was running a surplus. The capitalists will try to tell you that this is because they were making money off of oil. Oil only occurred in that same year to begin with. The state of North Dakota had been doing this since 1919. And in fact, one could argue that the discovery of oil, the Bakken oil fields in North Dakota, is more of a problem for the state in terms of social damage and environmental damage.
It absolutely is, because oil is the most toxic of the externalized cost industries.
Right.
A huge problem we're dealing with in Colorado right now, because they send in their henchmen to gut legislation a decade before they'd send in their hideous fracking. So we got that going on here too, while we also have some nascent, again, public banking efforts happening. Okay, so how do people get involved in creating a public bank, and how is it different from a credit union?
Well, I think one other URL I would suggest is Rocky Mountain Public Banking Institute.
Great.
They're doing a lot of organizing too. There's a number of cities in Colorado looking at this. California, probably Santa Fe, New Mexico is closer to this. Yes.
So, Berkeley and San Francisco.
Yeah. The Public Banking Institute.
San Diego or Los Angeles. Yeah.
Right.
Anyway.
So PBI's newsletter regularly taps into all of these things, and
Great.
if you
Public
subscribe,
subscribe. Everyone subscribe.
yes.
Vermont is working on this.
The what?
Vermont.
Vermont.
Oh,
Vermont. All of them. After we started PBI in 2010, literally this came to the floor of 20 state legislatures. Of course, the cartel at the state level has more power than it does at the local levels, and that's why cities and counties should be the focus right now. Because you can go down to the courthouse or the municipal building and go, whose side are you on? Basically, and look people in the eye. And I think that, as long as you can get honest elections, and that's a whole other problem, paper ballots again, and that leads us to our next step. So we go from making money a public utility through sustainable economics to restoring democracy. And, and part of that, part of the cornerstones of restoring democracy are verifiable voting and the decentralization of media. And we can see what's happening with both of these right now. The voting electronically, whether that be done by electronic voting machines or electronic counting machines, or we can see the suppression of independent journalism on the web. So we need to decentralize that. So those are the three pillars: public banking, verifiable voting, and decentralization of the media.
Okay, Bob, I just want to put the plug in here for the Greene Fyre Review, which is a vagazine, a vagrant vagabond zine. We exist in 5 or 6 different social media. We're a collaborative. Our goal is to find and promote the best of the independent media and to also spur independent journalism, the creation of original content. And we're on Facebook, and we had a reach of 18,000 last week. I don't know why they're letting us still exist, but we need to be moving quickly to Minds and BitChute and MeWe. And this video is going to be one of the first videos that we put up on BitChute. So folks, join the Greene Fyre Review movement, follow us on Minds, be part of independent media. The thing about independent journalistic voices is that they're cats that don't want to be herded. So we're doing the difficult challenge of introducing the idea of collaborating and collectivizing. You responded to the World Socialist website's call for collaboration between the media just a week or two ago at our request, which I haven't posted because I had the flu, but I did post it, but I haven't promoted it. But yes, everyone join us, join the Greene Fyre Review's efforts.
Okay.
Go ahead.
And I'll do a little plug here too, because if you're on Facebook and you look up 7 Steps to Global Economic and Spiritual Transformation, that is the site that I post all of my analysis at. So when I find an article that helps explain what's going on, pro or con, I usually write a little blurb before that, as I did with the WSWS that you just spoke about. And then I'll post it there, and I'll tag you and Jill Stein. I happen to go to high school with Jill Stein, so
of course you did.
I tag her, and also a few outlets like Counterpunch and Truth Dig and such like that. So 7 Steps to Global Economic and Spiritual Transformation. Go like that page, and then you'll get my post on articles, and so they'll be able to see the Greene Fyre Review as well as 7 Steps, and there's obviously an overlap there.
But everyone should be supporting independent media as much as you can. For now, Minds is open source. It looks like it was created by the CIA via Anonymous. I don't know how independent it really is, but
it's a little weird.
Yet.
You have to sign in. You can sign in using Facebook. That tells you. enough.
No, they have to do that. Everyone has to do that, though, in order to get any purchase at all. And
I see.
yeah, there's kind of a weird Antifa, anonymous type vibe sometimes that makes me feel a little bit. But anyway, follow a dissident media. Okay, so independent media. Go on.
And I also post to Colorado Public Banking, which is a Google blogger. So again, Google, they're doing the same thing as Amazon and Facebook in terms of suppressing progressive URLs and stuff. But all of my articles will be there. And once my book is out, that's be the first place that I'll be posting articles and showing people how to leverage these 7 steps into being able to analyze whatever comes up. So,
let's get a few more steps in here. We've got 14 minutes.
So we just went from restoring democracy, step 5. And there's a lot of great details here about, understanding how the United States was, quote, legally stolen. It wasn't really legal. I make the case in my book that this is all fruit of the poisonous tree.
Right.
That is a legal term, meaning that when you do illegal things to start a control over something or to basically indict somebody, that's all fruit of the poisonous tree, and it has really no legal validity. The only reason that they're able to maintain this charade is their control over the government, including the judiciary. And so that's the only reason the charade continues, that this is legal. It's not really legal. There's all sorts of
Tell us about the people's grand juries.
Yes. There are, grand juries that can be organized by the people, common law grand juries. And the government doesn't really want you to know about this, but basically voting citizens can organize their own grand juries independent of the cartel, because they control through voting machines, this apparatus. And these grand juries can basically indict people and hold them responsible. In terms of actually implementing that, that could be tricky, but it legally exists in counties. Actually, the county sheriffs are the highest law enforcement officer in every county, and I'm including federal officials in this, right? Now, of course, the federales have, taken control over many sheriffs just through thought control and, and all of that. But that's not necessarily something that really exists. The other interesting thing that I came across every day that I managed, the last little piece of evidence that I managed to slip into my book, and I'm going to write an article on this here soon, is the original 13th Amendment, which was actually approved. The cartel tried not to show that the state of Virginia, which was the 13th state to approve it, which was basically gave us 3/4 of the states approved it. So they tried to suppress this. It actually exists in copies of the Constitution up to a certain time, up to the Civil War, when they suppressed it and then replaced it with the 13th Amendment as we know it today, which abolishes slavery. Supposedly abolishes slavery.
But transmutes slavery into something more insidious.
This is a key one.
Lucrative.
Because the original 13th Amendment takes off on one of the articles, it's in Article 1, Section 8, that prohibits people serving the United States in the Congress from accepting titles from foreign powers, right? Now, there was no penalty in the Constitution, but it's in the Constitution. The 13th Amendment stipulates a penalty. This means that no lawyers who use the term Esquire are allowed to be in the Congress.
Right, because that term is recognized before the Crown.
Esquire is a title bestowed by the Bar Association, which is an English organization.
Right. It's recognized before the Crown.
Yes.
Oh my God.
That's what the Bar Association is.
We have
all laws passed from that date forward in 1819 are invalid.
Bob, so I really do think that 2018 is going to be the year of the fruit of the poisonous tree. It's being cited repeatedly in regards to the memo and the illicit powers that were grabbed by the cartel when it set up its Bush, Clinton, Obama, Cheney regime within multiple regimes. So we need to talk about the fruit of the poisonous tree many times in 2018. I really think it's sort of like it's our theme. It's our but let me get back to what are the last steps? I want to hear the personal steps.
Okay. So step 6 is restoring law, science, and logic. And this is really about how the law, and this is what we're just talking about here. So we can see how the law is now controlled by a foreign entity.
That's right.
Science really...
I mean, come on, the whole movie Hamilton was paid for by the bankers as hagiography to their patron saint who couldn't fast enough sell the U.S. Treasury and therefore the U.S. government people back to the Bank of England by creating a fake central bank, loaning his friends in the Bank of England the money to buy into the bank, and then forgiving the loans with the fake money it's unbelievable. I mean, we were sold so quickly back to the crown, and we wonder why we've had movies, since there were movies with British royals smugly sneering at us like they have a secret we don't know. Yeah, they did. But anyway, we're off topic.
Well, even the royals are controlled by the crown, technically, legally. The crown is the city of London, the financial district.
That's right.
The banking district.
Equivalent to DC, Vatican City, what?
Charles Dickens wrote about this.
He did. That's right.
That's who Ebenezer Scrooge is. He's a usurer in the city of London.
That's right.
By this we mean a private corporation within the greater London area, for which the Queen must ask permission in order to enter. Which she does every year, actually, when she goes in there.
Okay, this is super exciting, and now that we have better tech, we're gonna have to do these conversations regularly. Let's get to the next step. Okay,
so we're on step 6, restoring law, science. Science is being controlled through grants and everything. A perfect example.
A lot of that control is done through think tanks. You have to basically. The think tanks put out the position papers, the white papers that tell the research organizations, that basically give them the dictates. This is what you have to write your grants for in order to get funded.
Right. Exactly. An obvious example of this would be, say, chemtrails and weather manipulation. So for years, they were trying to tell people this is a conspiracy theory. Right. When in fact, you sent me a document a few months ago, 1978 United States Senate document talking about the types of weather manipulation and weather as a weapon that was going on at that time 40 years ago. We know it goes back further. We have documentation going back into the 50s or before.
My husband found the link to Weather Modification Inc., which has hundreds of contracts with governments all over the world to do. And I think their services range from, cloud seeding for snow, which has been happening, as you know, in Colorado without a permission. God knows what they're putting in the skies since the 70s or 80s or so, all the way up to controlling storm systems. And we're not even talking about the ionization of, the ionosphere using HARP and that whole weaponization of the entire atmosphere for various purposes angle of things. We're talking about the fact that they've been spraying this shit and there's over 30 companies that do this. And the one Weather Modification Inc., which I've been keep posting the link. Nobody's heard about it in the news. Nobody knows it's existed since 1961. Nobody knows that our tax dollars have been paying them to do things at the behest spraying us at the behest of our government and all these other governments. Just because it doesn't fucking exist in your media that you listen to doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. I mean, people are so willing to believe that the packaged reality they're given must be the whole thing. And if something didn't fit in there, then it's not real. Go ahead.
Right. Well, there are corporations
back to free media
in Russia doing the same thing, actually.
Right.
And I've got a link on that.
And in China.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so the real question there really is the weaponization and how they use weather to attack countries, or even our own colonies like Puerto Rico. You know, nobody talks about Cuba getting hit at the same time as this. That was part of that attack.
Sudan
as well. Yes, drought or floods. Same thing. Even China.
The droughts that preceded the disruption of Syria, intentional droughts, one of the most fertile and most ancient agricultures. I studied this when I was working as the marketing director for the Eco College. I did a lot of research and read the books by Gary Paul Nabhan, who and you know that the first thing that happened when we invaded Iraq was to destroy the agriculture, destroy the seed banks, and to completely wipe out the cradle of human agricultural civilization. Did the same thing in Syria. If we had any idea the level of the crimes against humanity that have been perpetuated by the cartel, which of course owns Monsanto. Are you fucking kidding me?
Yes. Yes, of course. Even in California, really, because when you destroy farms, you can buy them up at fire sale prices for later when you actually control them. So we've kind of come to the end here. We've covered restoring law, science, logic. We covered earlier in terms of Socrates and Plato and Aristotle and the importance of studying logical fallacies. There's a lot of great sites on the web to do that, which brings us to our seventh step, taking humanity. Evolutionary next step, which is overcoming the tyranny of the instincts and the ego, learning how to share. I often reference W.H. Audin's poem, September 1st, 1939, because he summarizes it right on the verge of World War II. We must love one another or die. So this is no longer utopian. It's actually necessary for us. People can start any kind of spiritual practice as simple as just, taking a deep breath, counting to 10 before when someone presses your button, you respond instinctually. This is the simplest spiritual practice. All of us can benefit by it. There's all sorts of other practices.
There's an infinite number of practices that help us to observe and hold the tension of the ego until we break through into something finer. There are thousands of them.
Right. I would say here's one key to all of these, and I go all the way up to the 8 limbs of the yoga, of what used to be called Ashtanga yoga. That's the actual original term, not the marketing company. They've got a commercial brand of that. But so what does meditation really do? They're using it in some schools now. The kids are really doing much better focusing.
It develops the observer as an antidote to the ego.
Right. So your center of consciousness moves from here to here.
Yeah.
This is what we're talking about. This then becomes your vehicle, and so this whole notion of we are spiritual. Your
vehicle of inclusion, your vehicle of creativity.
Yeah. So we are spiritual beings, having a physical experience, and you can live that when you're conscious from here, not from in here.
That's right.
Right. And
so now it's that was shocking, frightening.
Yeah.
So let's do this again really, really soon. These all-day marathon live streams are super insane.
This is great. And I like this technical platform. It works very well. Thank you.
Well, it's the in between. Tatsu's going to come on later and talk about Viewable and how that's truly a people's platform. But this just basically for $12 a month creates an almost reasonable interface, which is what Facebook should have fucking done in the first place if they really gave any kind of a shit about actually providing service and not just control. So
Right,
anyway,
right.
and
Okay.
maybe they're maybe all of their spyware, they're probably creating transcripts of everything we say anyway. You might as well share that with us, guys. Hopefully that'll be the next feature. We can just transcript these things. All right. So thank you so much, Bob. This is super exciting. We're going to have, I'm sure, lots of questions and lots of opportunities to do this more. And signing off for now.
Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Well, it was our greatest pleasure. Okay, talk to you soon.
Okay. Thank you, Mary.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.
That was